Mr. President. Today I rise to present AB 1955 to the State Senate on behalf of Assemblymember Ward and on behalf of the LGBTQ caucus. Probably some of you remember at the end of last year, towards, we've all been through COVID together. We've all been through strife together. And over the last year, we begin to see our school districts and our school boards become turned into things that I wouldn't call civics. One of the early bills I did was to provide a seal of civics for high school kids so we could get more people prepared to be active citizens of our society and learn to engage in respectful debate. So this bill attempts to put some guardrails on the forced outing type policies that were happening in school boards. We know some of those policies have not been able to go into effect. We know some of those school board members have since been recalled. And the LGBTQ caucus wanted to be very careful and strategic and surgical about how we approach this. We did not want to add to the vitriol. We did not want to add to the temperature, the volume going up on school boards. What we just want to do is make sure everybody's safe at school. We want to return schools to do what schools are supposed to do, is teach our kids. And provide a supportive environment where they can figure out who they are. That is one of the major developmental tasks that every single one of us has to do, is to begin to separate from our family of origin as we go out into the world and find our people. That is probably the largest developmental task any one of us can do, is to find our community, find our people, find our support, and learn to be healthy people in this society, healthy and productive people. So when we saw seemed like the proliferation of these forced outing policies, we're like, what can we do? How can we approach this? So we work with groups across the state. We work with parent groups, teacher groups, administrator groups, board groups, the LGBTQ community about what can we do? Because we know when we saw those spectacles at our school board meetings, we know we saw the impact on students. We know we saw the number of referrals for mental health go up. We know we saw the amount of bullying and harassing and division begin to increase. And we thought, how can we turn down the temperature on some of this? And just kind of, let's say, how do we get back to the basics? How do we get back to how it was when we went to school? We went to school to learn. And I can tell you, as a out 63-year-old person, I began to come to terms with myself when I was probably in elementary school. Began to question more when I was in early high school. I became pretty sure by the time I graduated from high school, but it was not something I shared with my parents right away. Did I feel like my parents would throw me out? No, I didn't. But I knew it would be hard for them, and they would struggle with it. And you don't want to do that to your parents until you're sure. And while I knew my parents would be loving and supportive, I also knew a lot of other parents that weren't. And let me just say, this was in the 70s when I went to high school, right? 70s. So it was a different time. And I do remember when I was still exploring around, I was dating a guy. That's right, I was dating a guy. And the school called my family. I remember my dad taking me for a ride, and he said, "Did you know the principal called me?" Which put fear in somebody like Susan Eggman. I said, "No, I didn't know that, Dad." And he said, "The principal called to tell me that you're dating a black guy. Is that true?" And I said, "Yeah, it is." And while my parents were not bigots, it was also the 70s and not something that they were celebrating. But to this day, I am left with the thought of how dare a school district, not knowing what was going to happen to me at home, take it upon themselves to share something personal about me that I hadn't felt comfortable sharing at home. So why would the school feel compelled to do that and interfere with my relationship with my parents and my own developmental process? I'm still struck by that, and still it makes me angry. So what this bill does is simply says, school boards cannot get in between students and their parents. Schools should not be inserting themselves in between a child's developmental process in coming to adulthood. This bill simply says schools cannot pass policies that mandate teachers become the gender police for students. This bill also says Education department should provide information for all parents on LGBTQ issues if they want to be able to seek things out, because maybe sometimes parents don't know. This bill also says that a teacher cannot be penalized for refusing to follow a policy like that. And this bill also affirms that students have an innate right to privacy. Unless it's something that's going to hurt them, then we all have an innate right to privacy. And so let's talk about what this bill does not do, because I watched the assembly hearing and I was left a little bit confused about what some of the arguments were. But what this bill does not do, this bill does not put students at risk. There's nothing in this bill which prevents teachers from getting students in crisis the help they need. Nothing changes that. This bill does not keep secrets from parents. We don't know of secrets that need to be kept from parents. This bill mandates that resources are provided to support families if their kid is LGBTQ. Parents are always free to have important conversations at home, as parents do. All this does, basically, is say, schools, it's not your job to be the gender police. We don't want those policies. We want everybody to be safe and affirmed. We don't want this increased pressure in schools. And we want kids to be able to learn and develop on their own time. So there's been a lot of scary stuff about what this bill is, and I hope I've been able to alleviate some of those doubts and just say this bill is about keeping all kids safe, making sure school boards aren't inserting policies into school districts that make teachers gender police, can't punish a teacher for not policing kids, and kids have a right to privacy. That's what this bill is. And I would respectfully ask that you all join me in turning down the volume, turning up, valuing our kids and their process, and I'd ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Eggman. Any further discussion on this measure? Senator Newman. Excuse me, Senator Dolly, and then followed by Senator Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I respect my colleague from Stockton a lot, so much. I'm taking a little different tack to this bill. She actually reached out to me and shared, she wanted to chat with me. I got some information about the bill, but I'm going to talk about what I think needs to happen here. I came to the legislature out of local government, and you've heard me many times on this floor talk about local control, and I'm not a big fan of the state telling locals how to run their county or their city or their school boards, quite frankly. So for me, this is about why would we have elected school boards if we're going to do top-down policies that tell them what they can and can't do? So for me, it's a local control issue. Parents are engaged in those elections at the local level. They choose their candidate, and they get behind those candidates. And so for me, I'm going to be not supporting this bill because I want to make sure that we have that local control, that we have those school boards that make those decisions. And there are conflicts. Absolutely there are conflicts, and those should be settled at the local level. And I do know in my district there has been some policy around this area. Not so much as maybe in Temecula and some other areas of the state, but I do have parents who are engaged and school boards who are engaged, and there are some conflicts there, but I believe they'll be able to work those conflicts out at the local level without overriding state coming down and saying, hey, you're going to do this or that. I believe in parents and school boards, and that's why I won't be supporting the bill today.
Thank you, Senator Dolly. I have Senator Newman, followed by Senator Skinner and Senator Wiener. Senator Newman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of this measure. We heard this measure in the Senate Committee on Education, and I commend to you my colleagues' remarks about not only what this bill is, but what it is not. And it is, in my view, wholly appropriate that the state should articulate and defend some fundamental principles, especially in the defense of a very important principle, that schools should be a safe and nurturing place where no student should be afraid to attend school or fearful of what might happen if what happens at school and in the course of a normal day winds up going home, to my colleague from Stockton's comments, or winds up in the news as part of this increasingly fractious, really toxic culture war argument that has come to school boards and often seems likely to subsume the more important conversations, which is how do we as a state provide the best highest quality, most equitable, most nurturing education we can. That's why this bill is necessary, and I'm glad to support it. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Newman. Senator Skinner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, appreciate the conversation we've had so far, and especially appreciate our colleague from Stockton's remarks. My daughter came out when she was pretty young, considering she was it was the end of her freshman year in high school, but she decided, and it was her right to make that decision, to not come out to all of her family. And at that point, her father and I were not together, and she did not want to come out yet to her father. And I needed to respect that. And if we had been in a situation where the school would have called her father, for example, what a violation of her privacy, and what a violation of her ability to talk to her father when she was ready, and to work that out between them, which of course they eventually did. Now, additionally, she had many friends who were not out, and the stress on them about the fear that they would be rejected by their families if they came out, I observed cause really severe self-destructive circumstances with those kids. One of them, who would regularly spend the night at our house because she felt much more comfortable, would do self-mutilation. We know that LGBTQ kids have the highest rate of suicide, and suicide, as we know amongst our teens, is up. We do not want to contribute to higher rates of suicide. It is not, I really appreciate our colleague from Orange County's comments about it is the role of our schools to have our kids feel safe. And around these things that are personal to them and something they need to work out with their families should be left to them and not imposed. And I think our colleague from Stockton's description of what her principal did in relationship to her, dating is just the most perfect example of why we need this bill and why it should not just be left up to either local control or the discretion of a principal who we don't know what their motivation might be. So I appreciate this bill. I appreciate our colleagues' comments, and I urge our aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Skinner. Senator Wiener.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I also rise in support of AB 1955, and I want to thank the author for moving this forward. I had apropos of what the senator from Stockton just said. I admitted to myself that I was gay when I was 17 years old in the late 1980s. I have the most amazing parents in the world who, so supportive, so forward-looking around LGBTQ issues. I literally have a lesbian aunt, lesbian cousin who were out in the 60s and the 70s. So I had no doubt in my mind that my parents would be completely supportive and affirming. It still took me 3 years to tell them, because regardless of how your parents are going to react, for any parent-child relationship, as a child, you have to be ready to have that conversation with your parents. It's always hard, no matter how supportive they are. And they were amazing. But I made that decision on my own timetable, when I was ready, not when someone else was ready to tell my parents, when I was ready to tell my parents. And for any LGBTQ person, whether gay, lesbian, trans, it is their business and their business only, and no one else's business when, whether, how they tell their parents. And that's what this is about. We want to make sure that these kids are safe, and we want to make sure that they're doing it on their own timetable as human beings. I ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Wiener. I have microphones up from Senator Nilo, Durazo, and Ciarto. Senator Nilo.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. President. I also have great respect for my colleague from Stockton, not just as a colleague in the Senate, but as an individual person, which she will be at the end of this year, I think, and still the same person. My colleague from Bieber mentioned the issue of local control. I do think that is a very important issue in this, but it's not the fundamental question in my mind. I understand the challenge of a minor going through questioning of sexual orientation, of gender dysphoria. I cannot minimize that at all. Though I didn't experience it, I hear the comments of my colleagues, and I fully appreciate that. And we're talking about the rights of students, legitimately, but we haven't talked about the right of parents. And parents do have a responsibility. In listening to my colleague from San Francisco with understanding parents, but he still delayed, I understand that. I appreciate that. I happen to feel that most parents are like his parents. There are some that aren't, but to a certain extent, we're treating this as if all of them aren't. And I just asked the question, not just for relevant colleagues in the room, but for anybody else that might be watching this session, or the press that might report on this session. I asked the question, as a parent or grandparent, but primarily parent, how would you feel if your child came to you to express their conclusion relative to sexual orientation or gender dysphoria, not just after struggling with it his or herself, but learning that the kid had gone through counseling with the school, or counseling unbeknownst to the parent, and the issue being in the child's mind concluded at that point. That's a little bit different than what my colleague from San Francisco stated. Now, this bill is going to pass. I get it. I'm not going to support it. But it would seem to me that it ought to at least express a priority for the school to talk with the child about communicating with his or her parents. It doesn't say that. I do think we have to include in the consideration the responsibility that parents have and the rights of parents too, in the way that I've stated.
Thank you, Senator Nilo. Senator Durazo, followed by Senator Ciarto and Senator Menjivar. Senator Durazo.
Yes, my remarks are very short and simple. I want to thank the author very much. I want to thank the senator very much for your comments. And I want to thank my grandson for his courage and for his strength and for his love. So.
Thank you, Senator Durazo. Senator Ciarto, the floor is yours.
Thank you. There we go. Thank you, Mr. President. So I want to start out by clarifying and making sure that my colleague from San Diego and my colleague from Stockton understand that I really appreciate the work that you put into this. And I want to give you a perspective, and I have to stand and give you this perspective because I am from the districts that you are talking about. I represent all three of those districts. And so I understand, but there is a difference between parents who want to be part of a process and want solutions that work for them and want to be included in their kids' lives. And that's, you know, a lot of the parents that I represent. That's what they want. They want to be included. They want to be able to have those conversations. They want to know what is going on with their child. Because when they don't, they get a child that is one way at home and a different way at school. Those are the kids that they wind up losing, and they don't know why. Parents need to be part of the process, and I am glad, and I don't know what extent the process for including those parents in the discussion of developing this bill. But what I notice in this bill is, at the end of the day, when a student goes off to school and they may dress one way when they're leaving the house, and you know, my sister did this. She was not gay or anything like that, but she dressed one way at home, and then when she got, sometimes she took the clothes she wanted to wear out of the bag because my dad wouldn't let her out. We were a single parent family in those years. So she would change when she got to school. This is a little different, but when that happens, they're already outed. They're already out. What we're really dealing with is where do we go from here so that we can support the child, because that is the most important part of this, is supporting the child and ensuring, because if they don't have the support they need at home, and they are not going to do well with the school part. And some of those statistics that have been quoted over the years about this, over the last few years about this, indicate that. They wind up homeless. They wind up without an education because they're not being supported. And we need to find out sooner than later whether they're going to be supported or not. So at that point, we can help somehow. Now, is this a teacher's responsibility? No. My whole family were teachers. And this is not something that I would lay on them, because guess what? They're not trained for that. They are not trained to try to take a potential conflict in a family and meld that family back together again and work their way through an issue like this. That's what parents are afraid of. They don't want to be left out of that conversation. And yes, some parents won't handle it well. And some parents may even do the rejection. And that's really sad. I went through high school at the same time that my colleague from Stockton went through high school. And I had a lot of really funny, good friends that were athletic, funny, really smart. And you know what? Some of them were gay, and none of us cared. And the school did not call up their parents. Their parents already kind of knew. They may have not had the conversation, but their parents knew. But when we're talking about what we're talking about today, there was a lot of not transgenderism back then. But what we're talking about today is a little different, because now we're going into a medical part of it that requires any minor that's under 18, a parent, to be involved with that and to ensure that they don't do something that the child doesn't do something that they will regret later. And maybe they won't. Maybe they won't regret it later. When I was raising my 3 daughters, I had a rule. Yes, you could have your ears pierced once, but you couldn't do tattoos until you were 18. Then you could make those decisions. You know why? Because when I was 40, I didn't want them coming to me and saying, "Dad, why did you let this happen to me?" We had to be involved. We were great parents that were involved with our kids. We knew every aspect of what was going on most of the time. But when they were in danger, yes, I did go to, or not danger, but when there were conflicts, I once got a call from a teacher at school, and I'm glad I did, because I was able to intervene. We talked to different parents, and we were able to repair what was going on. But the bottom line is, if I didn't know, it had nothing to do with this issue. But if I didn't know, I wouldn't have been able to do anything about it. That's the frustration you are seeing at these board meetings and things like that. And that's what some of the board actions are built around, that frustration, and trying to diffuse it because the loudest people in the room are doing that. We need to have a conversation. We need solutions that include parents, not teachers. The teachers aren't the notification process, but when this rises up in somebody's life, they're already out, they're gonna find out, social media, all the informal lines of communication will ensure that somebody's gonna hear about it in an uncontrolled manner. When this happens, what we should do is to develop a process where we do have a family counselor that's able to sit down with the student, which is able to sit down with the parents and say, this is what's going on, how are we going to handle this? That way we know which parents handle it well and which parents don't. And that way we can offer the type of help for these students that they need. I'm afraid what this bill does is it just pokes another stick in the eye of people that are concerned about that and further cements the ideological divide. And that's my concern with this. If we include the parents, that's the best way to take something from people being angry and mad to developing a solution that works for everybody. And this doesn't quite get there. So unfortunately, I will not be able to support this. Parental rights are super important, and if we keep ignoring that, it's going to keep being a bigger and bigger issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ciarto. Let's recognize now Senator Menjivar.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to share a different perspective to what you've heard from two of my LGBTQ+ caucus members. What my mom, thought was her responsibility when I was outed to her. At 16 years old, I was in a high school that was safe and affirming to me. I felt very true to myself there. I was able to be with my other queer friends. But the boyfriend of my cousin outed me. He told my cousin, who was at a different school, who then told my aunt, who told my mom. I came home to literally all my things on the front lawn because I was kicked out. That's what happens when parents don't accept queer kids. Okay? You can have all these positive stories, but there are more than enough stories just like mine. I went back into the closet because I needed a place to sleep. Because I needed a roof over my head to continue high school. So I hid myself, and I told my mom it was just a phase. And then I started dating a boy. And I would bring him home so my mom would see that I was, in fact, just confused and lost. So I lost my room, my big room, because I was an A student. I was an athlete. I had my own bathroom in my room, and she put me in the smallest room. And this was right before we got evicted from our home. I didn't come out to my mom until the age of 25 after that. And then she said my life was like a prostitute. Till this day, my mom doesn't accept me. Endless amount of conversations. You want to talk to counselors? No amount of counselors are going to change certain parents' perspectives of their kids who are queer. My friend would spend endless amount of hours crying in my car because her mom did not accept her. At 23, at 24, and to this day, we trauma bond about how we continue to have to kind of code switch whenever we're with our mom. I'm 35 years old, and I represent 1 million people, and I have to still code switch when I'm with my mom for safety reasons, both mentally and maybe physically. And there are many queer kids in California who have these stories, who go to school and feel safe. They can be their true selves. They can wear whatever they want. And then they have to code switch at home, but until they're 18 years old. We are asking for 18 years of their life to not have to code switch at schools, to be safe and know that no one in that establishment will out them until they are ready. And we do this because we know our parents. I knew my mom how she was going to react. I went to school, I went to church Pentecostal church, you can imagine. I knew her understanding. The pastor spoke about homosexuality every single Sunday, Friday night, and Wednesday. 3 times a week, I would go to church. I knew how my mom was going to act. I did this because I knew these kids, if they feel safe with their parents, will talk to their parents. If we do not feel safe, let us navigate that until we are ready, or until we don't have to live with them, or until we don't depend on them for a roof over our heads. So this bill is needed to protect us so that there's no barriers like this. And so a little 16-year-old queer kid who almost lost her home can grow up and be a state senator. I respectfully ask for an aye bill.
Senator Laird. Senator Rubio, followed by Senator Laird. Senator Rubio.
Thank you, Mr. President, and ladies and gentlemen of the Senate. You know, I think that this bill, I hear everyone's concerns, and at the heart of it, I do believe in parents' rights. And I think that this bill does nothing to take parents' rights away. I think that parents still have the right to discuss anything they want with their children. I still think they have the right to inquire, set the table so that their children feel safe to come forward and speak to them when they're feeling confused, if that's what they choose to do. But I also know as a teacher, so much that teachers have to take on. And this just simply says it's not one more thing that teachers have to worry about. That is not their job. Their job is to inquire about their learning deficiencies. How do we help them be successful? What do they need to move forward in their educational world? But again, when it comes to parents' rights, they still have every right to inquire, question, sit down with them. I think that's still going to be there regardless of this bill. And I think that's where I keep hearing the confusion. This does not take any rights away. But I also want to highlight, and I'm so glad that my colleague from San Fernando highlighted a different perspective. I'm going to add another perspective. You know, everyone knows that I am a victims' rights advocate. I've been fighting for domestic violence victims, human trafficking victims, and I have to tell you, I keep hearing over and over again, let parents deal with this. If only all parents did the right thing. If only they opened their arms and embraced their children. So I'm going to give you just 2 examples of how that is not always the case. And I think children are worth saving. One, as I'm navigating, being a victims advocate, I'm always listening to these stories. And I'll just tell you a story of a 5-year-old little girl whose mother at the age of 5 was passing her around to men from 5 all the way to 15. This little girl was abused, assaulted, sold, 5 years old. If only parents always did the right thing. That's not always the case. I was a vice principal in an elementary school when a little girl told me that she was being raped by her stepfather. It was my responsibility to call child welfare services. And later on, I learned that she was still in the home. And when I started inquiring about why she was still in the home, it appeared that the little girl recanted because the mother didn't want to lose her boyfriend. So she'd rather have her little girl being assaulted and raped every single night rather than lose her boyfriend. Again, if only parents always did the right thing. That is not always the case. And I agree that there's a few people that are bad actors and not all parents are bad. But again, it is up to parents' rights to sit down with their children and set the table and say, we're here, whatever it is, not necessarily about this issue, anything, gangs, drugs, anything that you want to talk about, we are here for you. Yes, so parents have the right to develop that relationship so when something goes wrong, again, not necessarily about this issue, it could be anything. They feel confident that if they went to their parents, they're going to be respected and listened to. So again, I wanted to just highlight the importance of understanding that not all parents do the right thing, unfortunately. I wish they did. They just don't. And as a teacher, I can tell you, we spend a lot of time trying to ensure that your children have a good education. We don't need to continue to add more things that don't belong in the classroom. Our job is to teach. Our job is to make sure that your children are successful. Our job is to tell you where the deficiencies are, what you need to help your child succeed, what areas you need to focus on. We don't need to get into your business, your life, your home. We are there just to teach and make sure that your children are safe. And I can remember many times children would come to me, and it wasn't because they came to me because I was the right person to tell. They told me because they didn't have anybody to tell at home. They didn't believe that they were going to be safe if they said something at home. So let's just remember that not all parents do the right thing. And I'm speaking for that 5-year-old little girl who had to endure torture because her mother passed her around at the age of 5 to different men. And let's also remember Gabriel Fernandez, if you don't remember that case. His murder, his torture, his death was based on rumors that he might be gay. And the parents tortured him, murdered him. And the sad part about that case is that school district didn't know. Adults didn't know. Adults saw the bruises, the harm. They shaved his head. He had bumps. I mean, all the signs were there. And yet parents not only did not do the right thing, they were the ones inflicting the pain on poor Gabriel Fernandez. So I will just add that this bill just keeps children safe. And with that, I also ask for an aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. I have microphones up from Senator Laird, Padilla, and Atkins. Senator Laird.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had put my microphone down because I thought the speech by the senator from San Fernando made the case in a way that I couldn't see anybody adding to it. But I think it's important to put that speech in the context of this debate, because it was said earlier, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but basically that this bill isn't about the majority of kids. That's right. It's about the kids like the senator from San Fernando and what happened to them, regardless of whether they're in the majority of all kids. And it is important for us to protect those kids. And I always refer, I wish I had a copy of it. When I was in the assembly, there was a study done by San Francisco State where they interviewed gay kids about what happened to them when they came out. And eventually they circled back to the parents and interviewed them. And there was a substantial number of kids that were thrown out of the house when it became clear. And they just moved into, many of them, an unspeakable life, on the streets, horrible things, at risk in major ways. And that study actually circled back to the parents. And many parents, when confronted with the fact that the choice was what was happening to their kids on the street as a result of them throwing them out, they really, many of them changed their view about the safety of their kids, but in many cases, it was too late. And so that's what this is about. It is, and I recall when I was a kid, my father was one of those teachers that everybody came and talked to. And he might advise people to go talk to their parents, but he was trying to have them have a place where they could feel safe and a voice and acknowledge who they were and work through what the issues were in a way that they weren't put at that kind of risk. And it has been difficult to hear that this is a matter of local control. Because I imagine if you're African American and we're in the South for the 100 years after the Civil War, you can imagine what local control meant. It was called state rights, but it really meant you couldn't vote, you couldn't have equal facilities, you were at the risk of being lynched, and we
as a people, felt like there was a higher calling and a higher civil right to act in unison to make sure that we protected those people that were not in the majority. And it was not about, well, it was about the majority because it was about what the majority was doing to the minority. But in essence, that all these issues are what we face here. To protect the kids, regardless of whether they're in the majority, to override people that might not have that best interest, and to just remember the speech that was given by the senator from San Fernando, because that's why we should all vote for AB 1955.
Thank you, Senator Laird. Senator Padilla, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and colleagues, and my esteemed colleagues, thank you for some amazing testimonials. Of course, I rise in support, and I think it's important to remember maybe an uncomfortable truth for some. This is not about parents' rights. This is about returning teachers to a place where they are focused on providing quality education and a nurturing, safe, and healthy environment for all children, no matter their circumstances. It is really an educational Hippocratic oath. Do no harm, either intentionally or unwittingly. When I was a very small boy in elementary school, I had a pretty pronounced speech lisp. Something that, unfortunately, in our culture and society for many generations, we stereotyped and were derisive and hostile towards as a stereotype of young gay boys and men. There was a period of time when I was in 3rd and 4th grade where literally every single day, the same group of boys, because these were the days, of course, when kids could walk home 4 or 5 blocks unaccompanied and it wasn't a problem. But I would get jumped and beat up almost every day on the way home from school. I would come home with torn clothing and some bruises, to the point that it alarmed my mother so much, not just the physical and emotional injury, but of course, the fact that she would continually have to keep shopping for a new set of school clothes. We ended up in the principal's office with my mother holding some of my torn shirts in her hand and demanding that the school do something to intervene. Every single day for a period of time, I tried walking different ways, different blocks. I tried slipping away, staying late. But there were some folks that just didn't appreciate how I expressed myself and jumped to conclusions about what that meant, knew that I was different, and decided, for whatever reasons they probably learned at home or gleaned from the implications and dialogue of everyday conversations, all the things on the playground, I won't repeat the names, the words, every day, that it was worth putting a little energy into following Steve Padilla home, no matter which way he chose to walk. A few years ago, I had the opportunity as an elected official to address a convening in Chula Vista at Eastlake High School of the Gay Straight Alliance. This was 400 people in an auditorium of all the Gay Straight Alliance clubs in the district. And what I would have given to have such a thing as a boy. And I can't imagine what it would have been like those days walking home and coming home with torn clothing if on top of the treatment from my fellow students, I had to worry about what my parents might do. For whatever reason, cultural, social, religious, or otherwise. And when I spoke to this group of GSA students, I was honored to speak alongside some Pulse nightclub survivors from Orlando, and I was able to tell my own story and my journey to hundreds of students. And when we were done, I was leaving with my staff, and I will never forget, these 2 juniors, 2 young Latina girls came up to me, arm in arm, And one of the girls was just weeping with tears coming down her face. Didn't say a word. She was in bilingual immersion. Her friend was very fluent. And she just walked up to me, and her friend was literally bawling. She said, "My friend wants to meet you." She didn't say a word. She just cried. And I will never forget thinking to myself, what must this child be dealing with every day that not only affects her as a human being, but certainly interrupts the environment she deserved to learn. This is not about parent rights. This is about protecting the dignity and worth of every student and acknowledging the long understood reality that there are situations in which, intentionally or unwittingly, we can place students in danger. And we ought not to do that. And I respectfully ask and I vote.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Senator Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank my colleague from San Diego for authoring this bill. Certainly my colleague from Stockton and the LGBTQ plus caucus for doing this and bringing this forward. I have appreciated hearing the stories of parents, of grandparents, of individuals that have had stories. We all have stories that bring us to this moment, particularly my colleague from San Fernando Valley. I could have had a similar story. I was afraid of abandonment and rejection, so I didn't come out to my parents until I was in college, and I knew I had a bed to sleep in and a place to be. Now, my parents had a different reaction, and I'm grateful. I am so grateful. But I just stood up because I wanted to add my voice of appreciation to teachers. Because when I was afraid of abandonment and rejection and didn't come out to my parents when I was in high school, there was a teacher there, and I never talked to one of those teachers in high school about the fact that I might be a member of the gay community. I never had to do that, but I could always feel the support of teachers. And I know that all of us can think of one teacher that made a difference in our lives, and we can say their names even today. And so my voice right now is appreciation for all of your stories and your perspectives to have this difficult conversation. But today, the support, as a number of colleagues have said, for tools for teachers to be able to support their kids, whatever those issues are. I remember a teacher giving $2 to one of the kids and telling him how to go to the laundromat and wash his clothes. And I ran into the kid at the laundromat, and he told me, I was a few years older than him, but he told me which teacher, Ms. Clater, who I had had in elementary school, gave him $2 so he could go do his laundry in a laundromat because the kid did. I mean, that was about a kid who obviously had issues. So this bill today is really support for kids, yes, but it's also support for those who are trying to teach kids and to be able to support those kids in their everyday life. And so I wanted to give voice to that because I sat here and listened to the stories. I always appreciate it. But a list of teachers went through my mind who got me through and to college to be able to become the person I am. But this tool is for those teachers. This came through the Education Committee. So with great appreciation and a shout out, I know we have teachers here, but wanted to say thank you for what you did to help me, us, and what you're going to do with this piece of legislation to be able to help our kids in school every single day going forward. I urge and I vote for AB 1955.
Thank you, Senator Atkins. Senator Ochoa Bogue.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've really appreciated all the stories that have been shared today by my colleagues. And I have great heart and sensitivity for all of them and great respect. I wish life wasn't as hard as it is for some. With that, I'm going to preface that this bill is putting everybody together with the LGBT community together. But in reality, I'm going to talk about going back to the school boards, what prompted this legislation today here. School boards have been passing policies that inform parents when their minor student is asking to publicly be treated as a different gender than their biological sex. That is, when the student is asking for the school to participate in the student's social transition. The policies in the school boards don't mention sexual orientation. What most parents are most afraid of is that their child adopting an identity that brings with it heightened suicide risks and irreversible medical intervention and blocking parents from helping their child. Studies show long-term social transition leads directly to medicalization. Foundationally, I want to make sure that my colleagues are aware that the California School Board Association encouraged the 900-plus school districts to adopt Administrative Regulations 5145.3. AR 5145.3 required students and teachers to use other student chosen name and pronouns, or they could be disciplined for discrimination, and likewise require that, and I quote, the compliance officer shall arrange a meeting with the student and, if appropriate, his or her parents or guardians. Clearly, AR 5145.3 makes involving the parents discretionary, but really it is a child who is deciding, just like AB 1955 does. AB 1955 is seeking to codify 5145.3 into law. My read of the parental notification policies is that there is no obligation to involve the parent if a student tells a teacher that he is transgender, but there is when the student asks that the school use pronouns or a name or permit him to use facilities for the opposite or change his records. Simply, once a student requests the school to participate in his social transition, that is when parents need to be notified. It sounds like the student is outing himself to the school and other students. This removes wherever privacy rights might exist. The federal judge in Mirabelli versus Olson case states in his 36-page order dated September 14, 2023, that according to FERPA, the privacy right of a child takes second place to his or her parents' right to know, and that a secrecy policy is as foreign to federal constitutional and statutory law as it is medically unwise. The judge also confirmed that no authority exists conferring upon children a privacy right in their gender identity as against their own parents. Quote, concerning the California state constitutional right to privacy for minors and regulations like a parent secrecy policy, the state's highest court has not had occasion to issue a binding interpretation, and no state appellate court decisions have been identified. Parents' rights are superior to a right of a privacy belonging to their child. A parent may curtail a child's exercise of constitutional rights because a parent's own constitutional protected liberty includes the right to bring up their child. The judge denounced the Escondido's parent secrecy policy, policy 5145.3. The school's policy is a trifecta of harm. It harms the child who needs parental guidance and possibly mental health intervention to determine if the incongruence is organic or whether it is the result of bullying, peer pressure, or fleeting impulse. It harms the parents by depriving them of the long-recognized 14th Amendment right to care, guide, and make health care decisions for their children. And finally, it harms plaintiffs who are compelled to violate the parent's right by forcing plaintiffs to conceal information they feel is critical for the welfare of their students, violating plaintiffs' religious beliefs. We hear a lot about the elevated risk of suicide of trans-identified youth. The figures go from 41% have thought about suicide all the way to 87%, which was the figure from Attorney General complaint against the Chino Valley School District. If suicide is such a risk, and we know that suicides do not happen at school, but that the vast majority occur at home, why would we not alert the parents to the heightened suicide risk so that they can lock up poisons, prescription drugs, and be vigilant, as well as get their child into therapy? We can't justify hiding a child's gender dysphoria from their parents. Horribly, 2 out of 315 of those youth, the National Institution of Health study that involved 315 youth at 4 major U.S. hospitals. The children were supported by family members in their trans-identified and intended to be a multidisciplinary mental team. Horribly, 2 out of the 315 of those youth ended their lives during the first year of the study. That is more than 40 times the suicide rate of their peers. Socially and medically transitioning a child certainly did not prevent the suicide. A new U.S. study, I'm not going to read that. For essence of the time, I'm going to go for Dr. Erica Anderson, a trans-identified man and psychologist who practiced at UCSF's Gender Clinic and is the former president of the U.S. Professional Association of Transgender Health, filed a declaration in a couple of California cases. Dr. Anderson states, parent involvement is necessary.
Excuse me, is that permission to read?
Oh, permission to read, I'm sorry.
All right, I'm going to grant it.
Permission to read. States, parent involvement is necessary to obtain professional assistance for a child or adolescent experiencing gender incongruence, to provide accurate diagnosis, and to treat any gender dysphoria or other coexisting conditions. Dr. Anderson also says, permission to continue reading.
Okay, permission to read granted.
A school-facilitated transition without parental consent interferes with parents' ability to pursue a careful assessment and/or therapeutic approach prior to transitioning, prevents parents from making decisions about whether a transition will be best for their child, and creates unnecessary tension in the parent-child relationship. Nor is facilitating a double life for some children in which they present as transgender in some contexts, but cisgender in other contexts, in their best interest. No professional medical association that I'm aware of recommends that school officials facilitate the social transition of a child or adolescent without parental knowledge and consent. It's difficult to navigate this space. Incredibly personal to families. But I can assure you that historically, parents have always wanted the best for their children. When thoughts of suicide have entered, or attempts of suicide suicide attempts have happened to children, I can assure that regardless of how parents feel about their child's gender identity, sexual orientation, parents will always step up and love their child. Maybe not always, but the majority of parents would. I'm going to end by just referencing court case in Hodgin versus Minnesota, 497 U.S. 470. 1990. The court said, a natural parent who has demonstrated sufficient commitment to his or her children is thereafter entitled to raise their children free from undue state interference. With that, I respectfully ask for a no vote.
Members, any further discussion or debate on this measure? Any further discussion? Senator Grove.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just going to take a minute because I have deep respect for the author and my colleagues that spoke previously on the floor from both sides, but the personal stories that came from our colleagues from specifically the LGBTQ community and those that are elected here in office that represent them statewide, you know, like all of us. We all have individuals in our community. My colleague from Stockton, when she was introducing the bill or talking in the presentation, she said, I want to dial down the conflicts, or dial down, I don't remember the word, but it was like dial down the rhetoric, I guess you'd say. And so I just want to make clear that, you know, frantically reading the bill while we were sitting here and listening to the debate, this Section 217, permission to read.
Permission to read, yes, it's granted.
Above 217, there's several paragraphs that talk about several resources that are available, and the language that goes through that is, it includes families. But under Section 217 of the bill, Section A1, the department, meaning the department shall develop resources or, as appropriate, update existing resources for supports and community resources and support of parents, guardians, families, of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning, LGBTQ pupils, and strategies to increase support for LGBTQ pupils and thereby improve overall school community climate. The resources shall be designed and used so the school boards operated. So the school boards will make the decision how these resources were designed, but the department is recommending under Section 2, the department shall develop the supports and community resources for parents, guardians, and families of LGBTQ pupils in collaboration with parents, guardians, and families, including but not limited to LGBTQ pupils. The department shall periodically update the supports of the community resources with, again, parents, guardians, families, and LGBTQ pupils that reflect changes in the law. As used in this section, school-based supports and community resources for the support of parents, guardians, and families of LGBTQ pupils include but are not limited to all the following. A, parents, guardians, and families of LGBTQ pupils support groups and or affinity clubs and organizations. B, safe spaces, for parents, guardians, and families of LGBTQ pupils. C, anti-bullying and harassment policies and related complaint procedures for parents, guardians, and families to have access. Counseling services is D. E, school staff who have received anti-bias or other training aimed at supporting LGBTQ youth and their parents, guardians, and families. F, suicide prevention policies related to procedures for parents, guardians, and families to access. As used in this section, the community resources will support parents, guardians, families of LGBTQ pupils, included but not limited to both of the following. Local community-based organizations that provide support to parents, guardians, and families of LGBTQ youth. Local physical and mental health providers with experience in treating and supporting parents, families, and guardians of LGBT youth. You could go on and on and on through the language of this bill. I'm just saying, you could go on and on and on through the language of this bill. I think when my colleague says dial down the rhetoric, we need to dial it down. The bottom line is that this bill says that teachers should not be mandated reporters. Listening to the personal stories of our colleagues on, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and on our side of the aisle, we could all tell heart-wrenching stories about our upbringing. I think we grew up in a different era. I think for different reasons. My mom was very poor, single mom. My dad was a jerk. I shouldn't have said that, but whatever. And we used to like steal potatoes out of the field to eat. And now I'm one of 40. And I went to a Naval Wave Continuation High School. And I was a fighter, in case you guys didn't know that, high school. But, so we all have different backgrounds. But they were very touching stories. Frantically reading through the legislation, which I have not read all of it yet, but everything that I did read to you is in there. And this policy that they are trying to develop is, the way I understand it, and I would like the author to correct me if I am wrong, is that they don't want teachers to be mandated reporters. That's in this particular space. Now, if they're being abused or there's child neglect, all those other policies, but in this particular space, they don't want the teacher, or I'm sorry, I should get the language out again, teachers, counselors, contractors, janitorial personnel, any school personnel that's paid by the school, I'm assuming, or contracted by the school. They don't want them to be mandated reporters in this space. Everything in this bill includes families, guardians, and the whole language I just read about the LGBTQ space coming together to develop these policies. I'm really going to get in trouble for this next step, and I know Greg Burt is flipping out right now. Nobody on this floor, I don't care who you are, nobody on this floor wants LGBT kids targeted. I have a pastor friend of mine who now works for CAPK, and they adopted a little boy from one of the mission fields that we went on to as a kid. And he came out to them, and he's transitioning, and they love him, and he's part of their family. But based on the comments that were happening today, not everybody has that experience. I can't find anything in here in the language, and again, I've frantically looked through it, and I haven't talked to a consultant about it because I've just been listening to, I don't know, what's been going around on both sides of the aisle. And I feel like I'm in my space on the assembly floor when Scott Budnick brought me youth offenders. And I listened to the conversation in my office, and one young kid says, I drove the car. And the other young kid says, I pulled the trigger. And then I'm like, what's your story? And it was an older man. He's twisting his hat in his hand, and he goes, my son would be alive today if this policy was available in this state. So he's actually campaigning for a bill that those two kids that killed his son to try to solve problems. I don't know what the solution to this problem is. I think love, Jesus said love, I say that I've said this before, maybe down on this floor, but I love the Lord with all my heart. And I know God didn't send his son to this world to condemn this world, and I'm pretty damn sure he didn't send anybody else. So I don't know what the solution is, but I do know that the bill does include parents, guardians for the solution. And I do know, or my understanding of the bill is that it does not require teachers or contractors in a school to be mandated reporters. There has to be a happy solution where parents can be engaged and involved in this process. Because although, like my colleague said behind me, he said, if parents aren't involved in the process, it doesn't work. If parents aren't involved in the process, and we do come across situations where parents are hostile to this situation with their children, then, authorities need to know. If parents, and when I say hostile, I mean hostile. I'm not talking, I'm not talking, the dad saying, I'm not going to let you do that. That's something you all work through. But I'm talking about hostile, detrimental harm to the child. I agree with my colleague from Yucca Valley, right? Sorry. Robe, I agree with Robe that, parents should be involved in this process. And it appears that the bill allows that to be involved in this process. There are a lot of questions that need to be answered. I do have concerns about the constitutionality. I understand my colleague from Bieber. School boards are elected by the people, closest to the people in those communities. I understand my colleague, the former Secretary of Natural Resources comments that, about the South and things like that. So there are a lot of good arguments on both sides of this argument, but we need to come together and figure out what works, because right now there is a lot of people in my district and in other districts that are fighting hard to gain control of their children's lives again without government interference in any way, without government interference about anything. Parents want to be able to raise their children. They want to be able to raise their children, and they should be allowed to. So I don't want to say I appreciate the floor debate because it gave me an opportunity to read the bill. I can't support the bill, Suze, I just can't. I have to have an opportunity to talk to somebody who knows more about this than I do. But what I've read so far, I will tell you that unless there's some in code sections, because I haven't had time to read the code sections and determine what that is in another piece of legislation, and so on and so forth, on the face of this bill, it looks like they don't want teachers to be mandated reporters and that parents will be involved in the process to develop something for the LGBTQ students, because I agree with my colleague, Robe, that I don't think every parent is like this. I think most parents and parents I know in my district are loving and accepting and working through this product of this without any government interference. But it grieved my heart from what I heard from my colleague from San Fernando Valley, and so and others. But and I think everybody should be loved and accepted. I don't think that we have to. I don't think that beliefs should be pushed on one way or the other from either side, and. Contrary to some of the stories that are on the floor, my Jesus loves everybody equally, no matter who they are and where they're at. And I know I'm a horrible example of him, but I try to be good. It doesn't work every day, you can tell. But I think we should just look into this legislation and figure out how to make it so that there's a communication where the rhetoric is dialed down on both sides and people really understand what the bill says and move forward that way instead of having it crammed through the way it's been crammed through. And there needs to be a deeper dialogue is what I'm saying. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Grove. Any further discussion or debate on this measure? Any further discussion or debate? Senator Eggeman, you may conclude the debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I have appreciated all my colleagues and all the debate. And I understand when we're talking about kids and parents, it is an emotional issue, and I think we heard that from everybody. And I'd also just like to say, on behalf of the LGBTQ caucus, aren't we fabulous? Aren't we fabulous? I mean, we show up and we smile and we're fun and we're all those things, but when you hear the struggles that we have gone through, I hope you really appreciate how fabulous we are. And I say that with pride, and I also say that so you know how determined we are not to let this happen to another generation of kids. That this is why we are so set and firm on saying we've got to take care of our kids and keep them safe. And you'll say that's parents' roles. We're not getting in between parents' roles. Parents still have these kids all the time. Parents have a relationship with the child. The school is not the conduit for a relationship with a child. And I don't know anybody who would think that the school is the conduit or the platform for a relationship with the child. That makes no sense to me. And the idea that local control, I mean, I hear that. I was in a city council. But the former Secretary of Natural Resources said, I mean, that's what we had when people would not let African Americans into schools. They couldn't go because that was local control. Why would we want to create a system like that again? Why would we want to create a system like that again? We don't. I don't believe we do. This piece of legislation simply says we're going to prepare with parents information for parents to be able to have it so they can help their kids. That kids do have a right to privacy, and we're not superseding the FERPA law. There is no superseding. There is no superseding of the FERPA law in this. Parents still have the right. There's no secret files. The law you're referring to says parents have the right to the student's educational files. We don't touch that. We don't touch that. And I heard your person that you were quoting from, I heard that testimony seemed to indicate that there was secret files, secret gay files that would be kept at schools, that would be kept from parents. That's absurd. Teachers don't have enough time to do the things that we ask them to do, let alone keep secret gay files from parents. That is ridiculous, members. Think about this, all right? What we're saying is provide information for parents to be able to have if they want to be able to help their kids, be supportive. We're saying kids have a right to privacy. We're saying school boards should not mandate teachers to call parents and be the gender police. And we're saying kids have a right to privacy. That's all we're saying. That's all we're saying. And you can make up as much else as you want to say about it. And you can say this is about medically and socially transitioning children at school. How could that happen? How could that happen without a parent knowing, I would ask? How could that happen without a parent knowing? Unless that parent is living under a table somewhere. As my colleague, the former firefighter, said, everybody knew, it wasn't a secret. So then what are you saying? If there's no secrets, that there's no need to be telling. Because I'll tell you, when the school called my family to tell them I was dating an African-American young man, that communicated to my parents that something was wrong, with what I was doing. That is the way it was communicated, and that is what these policies do. Alert parents that something is wrong and something should be done. Let's keep all of our kids safe. Let us tone down the rhetoric, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote on AB 1955.
Thank you, Senator Eggman. All debate having been completed, Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen. Aye. Aurora Regino. Archuleta. Aye. Ashby. Aye. Atkins. Aye. Becker. Aye. Blakespear. Aye. Bradford. Aye. Caballero. Aye. Cortese. Aye. Daly. No. Dodd. Aye. Durazo. Aye. Eggman. Aye. Glazer. Aye. Gonzalez. Aye. Grove. No. Hurtado. Aye. Jones. Laird. Aye. Limon. McGuire. Aye. Minjavar. Aye. Min. Aye. Newman. Aye. Wynn. No. Nilo. No. Ochobo. No. Padilla. Aye. Portantino. Aye. Roth. Aye. Rubio. Aye. Sayarto. No. Skinner. Aye. Smallwood Cuevas. Aye. Stern. Umberg. Aye. Wahab. Aye. Weiner. Aye. Wilk. No.
Please call the absent members.
Alvarado Gil. Jones. No. Limon. Stern.
On a vote of 29 to 8, the measure passes. Members, we're going to move next to messages from the Assembly. Ask the clerk to read messages from the Assembly.
Mr. President, I'm directed to inform your honorable body that the Assembly amended on this day passed